10. She stood in the doorway, wearing a dress I'd never seen before, phone in hand, barely glancing at the dinner I'd spent 2 hours preparing. "If I want to go clubbing with my ex, I will," she said, her voice cold and absolute. "You don't get a say. That's what freedom is." The words hung in the air like a verdict. Something inside me didn't shatter. It simply clicked into place with terrifying clarity. I looked at the woman I loved, at the candlelit table set for two, at the life I'd been desperately trying to hold together, and felt nothing but vast, quiet acceptance. I nodded slowly, my voice steady as stone. "You're absolutely right." My calm was a weapon she had no defense against. That night, while she danced with the man who would ghost her by Sunday, I packed my bags with surgical precision, left my key on the counter beside a 3-word note, "Enjoy your freedom," and vanished. When she came home at 4 a.m. expecting a fight, the only thing waiting was silence and the cold realization that freedom works both ways. Steam rose from the pot as I stirred the homemade tomato sauce, the aroma of fresh basil filling our small apartment. I'd spent the better part of 2 hours preparing Emma's favorite meal, fettuccine with a creamy vodka sauce, exactly the way she loved it. The candles were lit, casting a warm glow across the dining table I'd carefully set with our good dishes. It was Thursday, which meant nothing special on the calendar, but Emma had mentioned feeling overwhelmed at her marketing firm. I wanted to do something nice, something that said, "I see you, I care about you, and you matter to me." A bottle of her preferred Pinot Grigio sat chilling in an ice bucket, condensation beading on the glass. I glanced at my watch, 6:45 p.m. She texted earlier saying she'd be home by 7. Traffic in the city was unpredictable, so I wasn't worried yet. I dimmed the lights slightly, checked the table one more time, and returned to the kitchen to keep the sauce warm. The apartment we shared was modest but cozy. We decorated it together over the past 18 months, choosing that ridiculous oversized couch she insisted we needed, hanging the abstract paintings from the street market, arranging the bookcase that housed both our collections. Every corner held a memory, a shared decision, a compromise that had felt like building something real. I heard her key in the lock at 7:20 p.m. My face brightened automatically, the way it always did when she came home. But the woman who pushed through the door wasn't the tired professional I'd been expecting. Emma stood in the doorway, transformed. Her hair was styled in loose curls that hadn't been there this morning. She wore a sleek red dress I'd never seen before, something that looked expensive and deliberate. Her makeup was flawless, and her heels clicked against the hardwood floor with purpose. "Hey," I said, my smile faltering slightly. "You look amazing. I made dinner, your favorite." She barely glanced at me, her fingers flying across her phone screen. "Oh yeah, don't wait up for me. I'm heading out." The words landed like stones in still water, creating ripples of confusion. "Out? I thought we were having a quiet night in. I made the vodka sauce you love." She finally looked up, but her eyes seemed to look through me rather than at me. "Change of plans. Daniel's having a get-together at Azura Lounge. Some old friends are in town." Daniel. The name stuck in my throat. Her ex-boyfriend from college, the one she dated for 3 years before they had what she described as a messy breakup. The one who'd left her devastated. The one I had spent countless nights consoling her over when we first started dating. "Daniel?" I kept my voice steady. "Emma, you know that makes me uncomfortable, after everything that happened between you two." She cut me off with a dismissive wave. "Oh my God, Ryan, seriously? Don't be so insecure. It's embarrassing." The word embarrassing hung in the air between us like smoke. I felt heat creeping up my neck, but I forced myself to stay calm. This wasn't about jealousy or possessiveness. This was about respect, about basic consideration for the person you supposedly loved. "It's not about insecurity," I said quietly, gesturing toward the carefully prepared dinner, the candles, the effort I'd put into making this evening special. "It's about respect, about us, about what we're supposed to mean to each other." Emma laughed, but there was no humor in it. The sound was sharp and cold like breaking glass. "Respect? You mean your need to control where I go and who I see?" "That's not what I'm saying." "No," she interrupted, stepping forward, her heels clicking decisively against the floor. Let me make something crystal clear, Ryan. I'm going to say this once, so listen carefully. The apartment fell silent, except for the gentle bubbling of the sauce on the stove. The romantic atmosphere I'd created now felt like a stage set for a play that had taken a dark turn. "If I want to go out with Daniel, I will," she said, her voice hard and certain. "If I want to spend time with my ex or anyone else, that's my choice. You don't get a vote. That's what freedom means. That's what being an adult means. I won't be controlled." The words weren't said in anger. They were said with absolute conviction, like she was reading from a manifesto she'd carefully prepared. And in that moment, something fundamental shifted inside me. It wasn't a dramatic break. There was no shattering, no explosion of emotion. It was more like a switch being flipped, a light turning off. All the anxiety I'd been carrying, the constant worry about whether I was enough, whether she truly valued me, whether this relationship was actually mutual, it all just stopped. The confusion lifted, replaced by a clarity so sharp it almost hurt. She'd just told me, in no uncertain terms, exactly where I stood. And standing there, looking at this woman I'd loved, I realized that love wasn't enough when respect wasn't present. I took a slow breath and nodded. "You're absolutely right." My calm agreement clearly wasn't what she expected. A flicker of confusion crossed her face, followed quickly by irritation. I wasn't following the script. I was supposed to argue, to fight, to give her the dramatic confrontation she seemed to be anticipating. Instead, I just stood there, peaceful and resolved. "Whatever," she said, recovering her composure with a sharp toss of her hair. "Don't wait up." She turned and walked out, her heels clicking a staccato rhythm toward the door. It slammed behind her, the sound echoing through the apartment. I stood in the silence for a long moment, just breathing. Then I walked to the stove, turned off the burner, and covered the pot. The chapter was closed. I didn't rush. There was no frantic energy, no rage fueling my movements. What I did next, I did with surgical precision and complete clarity of purpose. I walked to our bedroom closet and pulled down my 2 large suitcases, the ones we'd bought together for a trip we planned to take next summer. That trip wouldn't happen now. I set them on the bed and began to pack. Every item I chose was deliberate. I took only what was mine, what I'd brought into this relationship, what belonged to the person I was before Emma and would be after her. I folded my clothes carefully, shirts, pants, sweaters, placing them neatly in the suitcases. I left behind the cashmere scarf she'd given me for Christmas. I left the matching mugs we'd bought on that weekend trip to the mountains. I left the framed photo of us from her sister's wedding. Those items belonged to a version of me that no longer existed, the version that believed we were building something together. From my nightstand, I took the novel I was halfway through. From the bathroom, I gathered my toiletries, leaving the expensive cologne she'd bought me sitting on the counter. I unplugged my phone charger, collected my laptop and work documents from the desk. In the kitchen, I retrieved my grandfather's watch from the drawer where I kept it safe, the only thing of real value I owned. It had survived 2 wars and 3 generations. It would survive this too. The process took about 90 minutes. When I was finished, 2 full suitcases sat by the door, containing everything that mattered, everything that was truly mine. The apartment still looked lived in, still looked like our place, but I had carefully excised myself from it, like a surgeon removing a foreign object. I went to the small desk in the corner and took out a sheet of plain white paper. I picked up a pen and wrote 3 words in clear, even handwriting. "Enjoy your freedom." I didn't elaborate. I didn't explain. There was nothing to explain. She'd stated her position clearly, and I was simply honoring it. I walked back to the kitchen and placed the note on the counter, propping it against the wine bottle I'd chilled for her. Then I reached into my pocket and removed my keychain. My fingers found the apartment key, her apartment key now, and worked it off the ring. The small metallic clink as it hit the counter next to the note felt final. I picked up my suitcases, took one last look around the space that had been home, and walked out. I pulled the door closed behind me with a soft click. No slam, no drama. just an ending. I didn't look back as I walked down the hallway toward the elevator. That version of my life was already in the past. I checked into a budget hotel on the other side of town. The room was generic and impersonal, exactly what I needed. The clerk barely looked at me as she handed over the key card. I was just another anonymous guest with luggage and a credit card. The room smelled like industrial cleaning products and had the kind of bland decor that exists in every chain hotel in America. I dropped my suitcases inside the door and sat on the edge of the bed, waiting. I waited for the grief to hit me. I waited for the anger, the regret, the crushing weight of losing 2 years of my life. I waited for my heart to break. It didn't come. Instead, I felt something unexpected. Relief. The constant tension I'd been carrying, the low-level anxiety of never quite being enough, the exhausting effort of trying to prove my worth, the background noise of emotional manipulation I'd been too close to recognize. It was gone. The silence was profound. I could hear my own thoughts clearly for the first time in months, maybe years, and those thoughts were surprisingly calm. I lay back on the stiff hotel comforter, still fully dressed, and closed my eyes. I slept for 11 hours straight, the deepest sleep I'd had in longer than I could remember. When I woke, sunlight was streaming through the gap in the curtains. I reached for my phone out of habit, then stopped. I opened the settings and blocked Emma's number. Then I went through social media, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, and blocked her on every platform. It wasn't done in anger. It was digital hygiene, like updating your security software or deleting spam. I was protecting my peace. I called my supervisor at the architecture firm where I worked and explained I had a personal emergency and needed to work remotely for the next week. Tom was understanding, asked no questions. "Take care of yourself, Ryan," he said. "The projects can wait." Over the next several days, I dismantled my old life with the same methodical care I'd used to pack my bags. I found a real estate agent and located a small one-bedroom apartment in a quieter neighborhood. It had large windows that let in morning light and a small balcony overlooking a courtyard. I signed the lease without hesitation. I bought a new bed, new sheets, new towels, everything fresh, everything mine alone. I set up my drafting table by the window where the light was best. I hung my own artwork on the walls, pieces I'd created before Emma, pieces that represented who I actually was. The apartment had no memories attached to it. It was a blank canvas, and I was the artist. For the first time in a long time, I started to remember what it felt like to simply exist without constantly managing someone else's emotions or walking on eggshells around someone's mood swings. I was sitting in a coffee shop, working on designs for a new client, when my phone buzzed with a call from an unknown number. My stomach tightened reflexively, the ghost of old anxieties, but I let it go to voicemail. A few minutes later, the notification appeared. I hesitated, then pressed play. Emma's voice filled my earbuds, and it was exactly as I'd expected. Irritated, inconvenienced, entitled. "Ryan, what the hell? Where are you? I came home and all your stuff is gone. This is ridiculous. Call me back. We need to talk about this. This isn't how adults handle things." I deleted the voicemail without a second thought. There was no tremor of doubt, no urge to explain myself. She'd made her choice that night. I'd simply honored it. 3 days passed. Then a text came through from a different number. "Okay, I get it. You made your point. You can come home now. Let's talk about this like mature people." I stared at the message. Come home. As if I were a pet that had wandered too far from the yard. As if my departure had been a tantrum rather than a decision. There was no apology, no acknowledgement of what she'd said or done, just a royal summons disguised as reasonableness. I didn't reply. The act of not responding felt more powerful than any argument I could have made. A week later, my phone rang again. This time it was Lauren, a mutual friend, though she'd always been closer to Emma. I considered declining, but something made me answer. "Ryan, hey." Her voice had that strained quality of someone who'd been drafted into delivering an uncomfortable message. "I just talked to Emma. She's really upset. She says you just disappeared without any explanation. What happened?" I said nothing, letting the silence speak for itself. Lauren filled the void, her tone shifting from concern to accusation. "Look, what you did was pretty harsh. You can't just abandon someone after 2 years without even trying to work things out. That's emotionally manipulative." The irony was almost funny. I'd given Emma exactly what she demanded, complete freedom from my input, and somehow I was the manipulative one? "Lauren," I said calmly, "there's nothing to discuss. I wish you well." I ended the call and blocked her number. The pattern became clear. Emma wasn't reaching out because she missed me or regretted her actions. She was reaching out because she was inconvenienced by my absence, because the story she'd written in her head had me playing a different role. But I was no longer an actor in her drama. I'd exited stage left, and I had no intention of returning for an encore. The truth came to me not through Emma, but through casual conversation at the gym. I was putting away weights when Marcus, an acquaintance who tangentially knew some of Emma's social circle, approached me while wiping down a bench. "Hey man," he said, somewhat awkwardly. "Heard about you and Emma. Sorry about that." I simply nodded, not inviting further conversation, but not shutting it down either. He hesitated, then continued. "Yeah, rough situation, especially with how it went down with that Daniel guy." I kept my expression neutral, but I listened. Marcus seemed to take my silence as permission to continue. "Yeah, from what I heard through the grapevine, he was only in town for the weekend. Was looking for an easy hookup with someone familiar, you know? Told his buddies that Emma was convenient and low effort." He shook his head. "Anyway, apparently he got what he wanted and bounced Sunday morning. Ghosted her completely. She's been posting some pretty depressing stuff online from what people are saying. Guess that freedom she wanted came with a price tag she wasn't expecting." I finished my set, the burn in my muscles clean and honest. I felt nothing. Not satisfaction, not vindication, not even pity. Just a distant acknowledgement of predictable consequences. Emma had thrown away a relationship with someone who would have stood by her through anything for a night with someone who saw her as disposable entertainment. She traded stability for excitement, and discovered that excitement had an expiration date. I thanked Marcus and headed to the locker room. As I drove home through the evening traffic, I realized that the last thread of "what if" had been severed. I'd wondered in some small corner of my mind if I'd made a mistake, if I'd been too hasty, too harsh, too unforgiving. But the universe had provided an answer. Emma's grand declaration of freedom, her dramatic assertion of independence, had been nothing more than a justification for pursuing someone who didn't value her at all. And somehow, in the twisted logic of her worldview, I was supposed to be there to pick up the pieces when it all fell apart. But I wasn't there anymore. I was here, in my own apartment, living my own life, finding my own peace. The weight I'd carried for so long, the weight of wondering if I was enough, if I'd done enough, if I'd loved enough, lifted completely. I hadn't been the problem. I'd been the solution she was too blind to see. That night, I cooked myself a simple dinner, ate it slowly while reading a book I'd been meaning to get to, and went to bed early. I slept soundly, dreamlessly, wrapped in the comfort of knowing I'd made the right choice. For the first time in longer than I could remember, I was genuinely at peace. 6 months passed like water flowing downstream, steady, natural, inevitable. I'd settled into my new life with a sense of rightness I hadn't felt in years. My one-bedroom apartment had become a true home. I'd filled it with things that reflected who I actually was. Architectural drawings I'd framed, plants I tended carefully, a record player and a small collection of vinyl I'd started building. The space was mine in a way that the shared apartment never had been. I'd thrown myself into work, taking on challenging projects that pushed my creative boundaries. My supervisor had noticed the change in my output, the renewed energy I brought to designs. I'd even been offered a promotion to senior architect, which I'd accepted. In the evenings, I'd started running along the river, something I'd always wanted to do but never made time for. The rhythm of my feet on the path, the burn in my lungs, the sunset reflecting off the water, it all felt like reclaiming pieces of myself I'd lost. I was sitting in a sunlit cafe on a Saturday afternoon, working on sketches for a new residential project, when my phone lit up with an unfamiliar number. The area code was local. For a moment, old instincts kicked in, that familiar tension, the anticipation of drama. But the new version of me, the one who'd built a life on foundations of self-respect, felt only mild curiosity. I answered. "Hello?" There was a sharp intake of breath, then a voice I hadn't heard in half a year. "Ryan! Oh my God! You answered!" Emma. But not the Emma I remembered. This voice was stripped of its usual confidence, raw and trembling. "Please," she continued before I could respond. "Please, I need to see you. I was so wrong. Daniel was nothing. You were everything. What I said that night, I didn't mean any of it. Can we please just meet, talk?" I took a slow sip of my coffee, letting the moment breathe. The liquid was perfectly balanced, not too hot, not too bitter. "I think you meant exactly what you said," I replied evenly, stating it as simple fact rather than accusation. "No!" The desperation in her voice was palpable. I was testing you. Or stared. I don't know. Please. I'm at the apartment. Our apartment. It feels so empty without you." Testing me. The words clicked into place like the final piece of a puzzle. She'd viewed our entire relationship as some kind of game, a series of challenges where I was supposed to fight for her, prove myself, compete for her attention. And by refusing to play, I'd failed the test she'd set up. "I'm busy, Emma." My eyes drifted back to my sketches. "Busy with what?" The fragility began cracking, revealing something harder underneath. "This is important. This is about us." "There is no us," I said simply. The silence on the other end lasted only a moment before the dam broke. The pleading vanished, replaced by the anger of someone denied what they believed was rightfully theirs. "So that's it?" Emma's voice rose sharply. "After 2 years you just run away? You're a coward, Ryan. You didn't even have the guts to fight for us. You just packed your bags like a thief in the night and disappeared." I let her words hang in the air, giving them the silence they deserved. They were meant to wound me, to provoke a reaction, to pull me back into the toxic dance we'd been doing for months. They bounced off me like rain off glass. When I spoke again, my voice was quiet but firm, not angry, just final. "You told me you wanted freedom from my opinion," I said, each word clear and measured. "I gave it to you. You said I didn't get a say in your choices, so I stopped having one. About you, about us, about any of it." I paused, letting that sink in. "The moment you walked out that door to go clubbing with your ex, you made your choice. You chose freedom over partnership. You chose independence over us, and I respected that choice by making one of my own." Her breathing was ragged on the other end, a mixture of fury and something that might have been panic. "You became a stranger to me that night," I continued, "and I don't waste energy on strangers. Don't contact me again, Emma." I ended the call, not with a dramatic flourish, just a simple press of a button. I set the phone face down on the table and took another sip of coffee. The world hadn't shifted. The cafe was still full of Saturday afternoon conversations, the smell of espresso, the gentle acoustic music playing overhead. My heart rate was steady, my hands weren't shaking. I'd just closed a chapter of my life, and it felt like the most natural thing in the world. I turned back to my sketches, but before I could pick up my stylus, someone approached my table. "Excuse me, is this seat taken?" I looked up to see a woman about my age, holding a coffee and a book. She had kind eyes and a genuine smile. "It's all yours," I said, gesturing to the empty chair. "Thanks. I'm Claire, by the way. I've seen you here before. You're always working on those amazing drawings." "Ryan," I said, extending my hand. "Architect, and thanks."
We shook hands, and she settled into the chair across from me, opening her book. A comfortable silence fell between us, the kind that doesn't need to be filled. For the first time in a long time, I felt genuinely open to whatever came next.
3 weeks after that phone call, I was back at the same cafe meeting Claire for coffee. What had started as casual conversation between strangers had evolved into something more, something easy and natural. Claire was a graphic designer with her own freelance business. She was sharp, funny, and had the kind of quiet confidence that didn't need validation from anyone. When she talked about her work, her eyes lit up with genuine passion. When she actually listened, asking thoughtful questions instead of waiting for her turn to speak. We were laughing about a disastrous client meeting she'd had when the bell above the cafe door chimed. Emma walked in. I recognized her immediately, though she looked different. Gone was the polished, put-together woman who'd walked out on our dinner 6 months ago. This version wore faded jeans and an oversized sweater. Her hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail. There were dark circles under her eyes that makeup couldn't quite hide. She was alone. Her eyes scanned the cafe, probably looking for an empty table, and landed on me. For a split second, I saw hope flash across her face, raw and desperate. Then she saw Claire. She saw how we were sitting, leaning slightly toward each other across the small table. She saw Claire's hand resting near mine, comfortable and natural. She saw the genuine smile on my face, the kind of unguarded expression I hadn't worn in years when I was with Emma. Most importantly, she saw that I was happy, genuinely, effortlessly happy. Our eyes met across the room. I didn't look away, but there was no recognition in my gaze, no anger, no smugness, no residual pain. I looked at her the same way I'd look at anyone else in the cafe, a stranger who happened to catch my eye for a moment. She was just another person, a background character, someone who used to be significant but was now simply irrelevant. I turned back to Claire, picking up our conversation exactly where we'd left off. "So what did you tell the client?" I asked, genuinely interested. From my peripheral vision, I saw Emma's face crumble. The hope that had flickered in her eyes extinguished completely, replaced by a dawning realization of just how thoroughly I'd moved on. She wasn't my villain anymore. She wasn't the one who got away. She wasn't even a painful memory. She was nothing. A footnote in a chapter I'd already closed and filed away. She stood frozen for a moment, the weight of her own insignificance clearly pressing down on her. Then she turned and hurried back out the door, the bell chiming softly behind her. I didn't watch her leave. I was already focused forward on Claire's story, on our conversation, on the present moment. The past could take care of itself. That evening, I stood on the balcony of my apartment, looking out over the courtyard as the sun set. A glass of wine sat on the railing, not the expensive brand Emma had preferred, but a bottle I'd chosen because I actually liked the taste. My phone buzzed with a text from Claire. "Had a great time today. Same time next week?" I smiled and typed back, "Absolutely. Looking forward to it." Simple. Honest. No games, no tests, no manipulation. Just two people who enjoyed each other's company, choosing to spend more time together. I thought about the journey that had brought me here. 6 months ago, I'd walked out of an apartment and a relationship that had been slowly suffocating me. I'd walked away from someone who saw love as a battlefield and relationships as a series of power struggles. And I'd walked toward this: peace, self-respect, genuine happiness. The old version of me might have stayed, might have fought for Emma, might have convinced himself that her behavior was a cry for help, that underneath the cruelty was someone worth saving. The old version would have sacrificed his dignity on the altar of making it work. But that version of me had died the night she walked out to meet her ex. What had risen from those ashes was something stronger, Someone who understood that love without respect is just elaborate self-destruction. I'd learned that the most powerful thing you can do sometimes is simply walk away, not in anger, not as punishment, but as an act of self-preservation and self-respect. Emma had taught me an invaluable lesson, though not the one she'd intended, that freedom works both ways. She'd claimed her freedom to do whatever she wanted without considering my feelings, and I'd claimed my freedom to build a life without her in it. The irony was that she'd been right about one thing: freedom is important, but true freedom isn't the ability to hurt others without consequences. It's the ability to choose yourself when staying would mean losing yourself. I'd chosen myself, and in doing so, I'd found something I didn't even know I was looking for: contentment. Not the desperate, performance-based happiness that requires constant validation, but the quiet, steady kind that comes from within. As the last light faded from the sky, I raised my glass in a silent toast to new beginnings, to self-respect, to the courage it takes to walk away from what's destroying you and toward what might save you. Tomorrow, I'd wake up in my own apartment, make coffee in my own kitchen, work on projects that excited me, and maybe text Claire about weekend plans. I'd continue building this life I'd created from scratch, one decision at a time. The past was gone. The future was mine. And for the first time in a very long time, that future looked bright.